Welcome to the Front End Nerdery podcast, a podcast about front end development and design. I'm your host, Todd Libby. My guest today is UX consultant, author, and alleged knight of the realm, and I hope there are jousts and swords that go along with that title. The former co-host of the podcast Boagworld and co-host of some others currently.
Yeah, there's don't even bother. There's one footer in the grave is something I do with Andy Clark and John Hicks and Marcus as well. And yeah, a lot of that. And the Knight of the Realm thing, that was supposed to be me messing around, filling in your form. I didn't think you'd mention it on the podcast. Yes, I am a Knight of the Realm. Let's go with that.
Yes, you are. Yeah. So, and speaking of Boagworld, I was sad to see the final episode where it was recorded a while back with Marcus. So, yep. My guest, Paul Boag. Paul, how are you today?
I am very well indeed. I've just come back from a holiday, so I'm very relaxed and chilled. Nice. And then I'm also going off to the States actually in a month where we're going to buy an RV and I'm going to turn into a digital nomad, whatever one of those is. So it's a very exciting time in my life at the moment. But anyway, nobody needed to know any of that. So there you go.
Well, if you're in the Phoenix, Arizona area, let me know.
Oh, I will do. Don't worry. I've got quite a list of people that I'd like to, meet up with. But yeah, that would be awesome. We ought to do it.
Definitely. So, would you tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer at this stage. I've been working in the industry for 27 years. So 1994, I think I got into things. So is that more now? I can't. My maths is terrible. So yeah, been going for a long time. Did the whole .com boom and bust. Set up a web design agency. And then in 2005, I started blogging and podcasting. And I was the first ever web design podcast. There was nothing about web design before we started. And I did that for 16 years. So it did stop March last year, but I think that's probably fair enough. I've done my dues. Yeah. And got out of the way for new people like you to kind of get in there and do take it to the next level or some such bullshit. I don't know. But what I do is I spend a lot of my time consulting over user experience. I do a little bit of digital transformation work and a lot of conversion rate optimization work. So those are my main focuses these days. But I'm one of those people that is kind of interested in everything. Well, I say everything. When it gets to real back end technology, my eyes glaze over and I start dribbling. But anything vaguely front end related is fun as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, definitely. So let's jump right into the questions. How did you get started in your web development design journey?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was pure luck. If I'm honest. So I was at art college in 1993-ish. Obviously it was, I was doing a course called Art, Media and Design because you certainly didn't have anything internet related at that point. And it, I was destined to spend my career working in McDonald's like all art students. But as it so happened, I was in the studio one day and then pinned up. There was a little notice pinned up on the notice board that nobody ever looked at, saying that IBM was looking to recruit a student intern, and so I went for that. Got down to the last two, got turned down, but then they changed their minds and decided to take two students instead of one, and so I worked with IBM's multimedia division, which consisted of about 6 people sitting in a cupboard at that stage. And I was working on the first ever PC that they produced with a sound card and a CD-ROM, right? Okay. So I was working on the software that went with that. a bit of a multimedia CDs. I don't suppose a lot of people even remember what those are, but they were a thing. And then towards the end of that year as an intern, these people started approaching the team going, do you know anything about this internet? You know, and can you make us a web page? We should have a web page, you know. And my team leader took one look at it and went, well, that's boring. It was gray background. They'd only just introduced the image tag. There was no layout. So what do? You give it to the intern, don't you? Yeah. So that, and there began my career in the web.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so I kind of went from writing HTML in Notepad to, you know, I went through the whole kind of Dreamweaver front page era and all the rest of it all the way through. I've been going ever since.
Yeah. I remember those days.
They were good days.
They were good days. Yeah. The Mosaic
the Wild
browser.
West of the web.
Exactly.
When you could, the best thing about those days, which we've lost, and it is not for any particular reason other than the fact that websites have just got hugely more complicated. But the way you learnt back in those days is just right click on any website and view their source.
Yep.
And you can't do that these days because it's just this mess of JavaScript and CSS and endless divs. So it's very hard to do, but that's how I learned, just by looking. Do you know, when I started, I looked this up once. Google wasn't around, right? So there was just Yahoo, and I looked up how many pages Yahoo had indexed back on the year I started, and it reckoned there were only 2,000 sites on the internet back then. 2,000.
Oh wow, yeah. Yeah. So when you talk about Yahoo back then, what we had Yahoo, we had Lycos, Alta Vista, InfoSeek, all those search engines that are now hanging out in the Internet Archive.
Exactly. Yeah. And then of course there was only, when I started, it was only Netscape Navigator, and I think Mozilla was around there, maybe. No Internet Explorer, no Safari, you know, and that was even before the browser wars. And that, again, that's a thing that most people have no idea what I'm talking about, browser wars. But there was a time where, you know, most websites were IE only. Talk about bad accessibility, Todd, you know, but it puts it into context these days, doesn't it?
Yes, it certainly does. So I wanted to talk user experience with you because I have, and I would also recommend to anybody listening or watching to subscribe to your newsletter, because it's got some terrific information and tips. And, you know, I can take a little nugget out of your newsletter and, you know, apply that to what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the newsletter a bit? Yeah,
the newsletter is a relatively recent occurrence, and it's actually my favorite thing now. An interesting thing happened. Do you remember? Sorry, I'm going to do a bit of a nostalgia thing yet again, as if we didn't already do that. But there was a time when, you know, you would subscribe to a whole load of blogs, weren't you? And you would use your RSS feeder to go through, you know, and read these regularly. But then, truth is, there's just too much content these days, so nobody ever does that anymore. So what that's done is it kind of changed the role of blogs these days. Now I do still blog, and I, you know, blog every other week, but those posts are almost always only viewed if someone searches on something via Google, goes straight to the blog post. Now that's fine, because what we do is we Google a question we've got, and you find a blog post that answers it. But my problem with that is there are quite a lot of subjects that you would never search on, right? Things about your career or particular ways of approaching projects or different angles. They're not ones that have got a clear keyword to search on. And anyway, you might not think to search about them in the first place. you're not actually you're only getting fed things that you specifically think you need. So my response to that is I now do a newsletter, which does, I don't know why you call it a newsletter, because it's no news in it. It's just me sharing insights and experiences of working in UX for those number of years. Sometimes we might be talking about content one week. Another week, we might be talking about burnout, all kinds of weird and wacky things that are not the kind of content that you would search on. And actually, I've found it's by far the most enjoyable thing I do in my job now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Because like I said, there's always something I can take from it. And again, to people watching or listening, subscribe, and I will have the link to that in the show notes for anybody if they want to subscribe. So I'm looking at some tweets here.
No, this isn't my tweets, is it? Are you looking at my tweets? Because it could be anything.
I'm looking at the ones that I have questions about. How's that?
Oh, okay.
that have everything to do with the user experience.
Okay. I'm feeling more comfortable now, Todd. Carry on. You said this in 2013, and now you're cancelled because of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not going into a deep dive or any cancel culture.
Good. I'll relax.
So in this one, it says testing design is about informing the design process, not replacing the designer. So
yes.
when I read that, first off, I was thinking, okay, this ties in with what I've been talking about lately with people, and that is accessibility and how it starts from the design process, in my opinion, and some other people's that I've talked to. Excuse me. So one, it's kind of a two-part question here. One, could you go into that tweet a little bit? And two, is how important is, because I always ask this of people, how important to you is accessibility in design?
I'll take the second one first. Because I would say for me personally, I've always been an advocate of accessibility. In fact, I think one of my earliest podcasts was on accessibility. In fact, the first one was, I think, the inaccessibility of PDFs was how I decided to kick off my very rock and roll podcast. I mean, that's a real good one to grab people and bring them in, isn't it? So yeah, it is absolutely fundamental. In fact, if you go back to my university dissertation, I wrote it on how, it shows how naive I was back then, how I figured that the internet had an amazing potential to empower people with disabilities and people from poorer backgrounds and different things. And I still believe that now, even though it's maybe not been realized in quite the way that I'd hoped. So yeah, it's absolutely fundamental to me. To dig into the tweet, I think the thing that I was driving at in that is that I think there are some designers who fear a little bit testing. I mean, there's the classic story about Google testing 15 different shades of blue, to decide on their approach. And so there is a certain percentage of designers that feel that design undermines their creative freedom. And the same would be true with accessibility as well, that that having to test it, or worry about accessibility undermines the creative freedom. And I think there are 2 points to make about that. First of all, design by its nature is working within constraints. That's one of the fundamental differences between design and art, right? Art is about self-expression. It's about working without constraints, without limits, or at least any constraints you impose on yourself. Design is about delivering to a brief within constraints that you're given, right? So I think you're fundamentally misunderstanding design if you think that you shouldn't have any constraints placed upon you. But secondly, and I think this is the key element, is that people see testing as something that's going to curtail them and hinder them rather than help them. And in my mind, actually, testing is incredibly helpful. Not only does it lead to better design, but let's imagine for the moment that whoever's listening to this is the perfect designer. When they design something, they get it right every time, first time. And I don't think there's anybody out there that does that or believes that. But let's imagine you are. I would still test. And the reason that I would still test is because testing gives you a justification for your approach, right? It allows you to have evidence to support the approach that you're using and you're implementing, right? And that is hugely beneficial to dealing with stakeholders and clients and things like that. And it also cuts down that iteration hell where you get stuck in, the client goes, oh, well, I don't like it very much. Can we change the blue to pink? And you change the blue to pink. They look at it, go, I don't like that, but I can't admit that. So then they just change something else in the hopes that that will fix it. And you go on and on and on like that. Yeah. If you're making design decisions based on evidence rather than the stakeholder or client's opinions, it gets so much easier. Now, bringing it back to the subject of accessibility, again, a lot of people see it as a hindrance, but actually, again, it can be empowering for exactly the same reasons that, you can take the accessibility argument is a really, really powerful argument to make to clients in terms of why a design is the way that it is. Why it has to be readable, why it has to be high contrast, why it has to be easy to scan, all of those kinds of things. Now, of course, your problem there is that there are a lot of clients that go, well, we don't care about accessibility. Blind people don't use our website. So that's where you need to get into the subject and why I generally don't talk about accessibility. I talk about inclusive design is the phrase that I prefer.
Yeah.
And I talk about situational disability. Oh, I see. So you don't want anybody that an elderly audience. You're not interested in anybody over 45 then. Oh, no, we are. Yeah, but your vision starts going at that point, right? And then you say things like, oh, you're not interested in people that don't speak English as their first language. Oh, no, I am. Oh, well, then you want to watch your reading age and make sure your text is clear, right? So accessibility can actually be a tool in delivering good design in terms of your arguments with clients. Yeah. Not that I'm just a manipulative bastard that basically manipulates clients into doing what I want them to do, but it helps.
Yeah. So I've talked about this a lot with people that have come on, and I'll share this with you. I don't know if I've shared this with you before in one of the Zoom calls we've been on, but I had a stakeholder who said, we don't have disabled users that use our product, because that was when I was working for a company that had a SaaS product,
right,
and the public facing website. And I'm like, but you're wearing eyeglasses. Those are an assistive technology.
Yeah.
It took about 2 or 3 more meetings with him to shed some light on it. And they were like, okay, well, go ahead and take the ball and go with it.
My best ever example of that was when we worked at Headscape. We had this really, really talented designer. He still is at Headscape, and he's still very talented. That's the agency I used to run.
Yep.
He's a bit older now and a bit wiser, but when we started working with him, he was quite a young guy. He was early 20s, something like that. He was an incredibly talented designer, but he was a very subtle designer, right? Okay. Everything was, shades of gray and very elegant, beautiful, but totally inaccessible, right? And I would let him get away with a certain amount of it. But there was one project in particular where we were designing websites for an elderly audience, right? And it was like, hang on a minute, you've got to make it accessible, you've got to make it really bold, you've got to make it obvious, easy to read. And it was this constant battle with him. And then one day I said, right, that's it. I went over to my coat. It was in the middle of winter. I got out my big pair of thick gloves. I said, put those gloves on, right? So he put the gloves on. I then took off my glasses because I'm short-sighted and gave them to him and say, wear those. Right, now use your website. And of course he couldn't, because he couldn't see it. He couldn't use the mouse properly. And I said, well, that is what it's like for your elderly audience. They have arthritis, they have poor vision, and you're expecting them to use that design. And it was this light bulb moment in him. Obviously, he grumbled and moaned about it and said, because nobody ever likes admitting they're wrong. But it did then lead to a change in his behavior. So I think it's very hard for quite a lot of people to put themselves in the position of others and to imagine what that experience is like. And that combined with the fact that when you say disabled or accessibility, it has suddenly everybody has a very narrow view of what that is. And it can be a recipe for disaster in a lot of situations. So you need to broaden people's definitions out.
Yeah, definitely. And I've been using inclusive design a lot more in my vocabulary too. And because I've really taken the whole accessibility thing to another level as far as personally and with projects for the past maybe 5 years plus, because of family members I know and friends I know, and pretty much, move that to everybody, make everything inclusive. Don't leave anybody out, even if it's like, if you're in a rural area and you have a 3G network, that's still accessibility. So I got another tweet here and I like this one because it reminds me of an old project I used to work on, which I'm pretty sure you've heard me grumble about in one of our Zoom calls.
Probably, yeah.
It says internet design is almost universally terrible. This is costing companies in productivity, training, and even in customer experience. Fortunately, we can fix this.
Yeah.
Okay, let me start off with this. So the thing I talk about was, it was a 15-year-old product, and the design was something out of maybe Windows 1 or 3 or 2, maybe. So and it was what, I think it was like 2018 or 2019 when I started in on that project. So can you go into, the internet design is almost universally terrible? Because it is.
It's not internet, is it? It's intranet.
Intranet, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. What happens, you see, where you partly got to think about where intranets are held within most organizations, and mostly they're held within IT departments. It's the IT department that's responsible for the intranet. And immediately that's a problem, because what essentially IT departments do is they create platforms, they provide platforms, and often they buy in those platforms. So what they end up doing when it comes to, we need an intranet, they end up going out and looking at, well, what intranet software there is there. Oh, SharePoint comes with Microsoft and we're already signed up for Microsoft, we just install that. And then it turns into this Wild West where people just dump anything, right? And so you end up with these systems that were not fit for purpose to begin with, because they're generic products rather than tailored to the specific needs of the organization. B, they're not usually configured very well, because oftentimes they're just launched in their default configuration because nobody knows to do it any other differently. And C, then people are dumping content into them completely randomly. And so, there's no hierarchy, there's no the findability on these things are terrible. So you have poor usability, you have poor findability, often poor readability on them, let alone poor accessibility. So you end up with all of these problems. Now, and then what happens is everybody comes to hate that platform,
Yeah.
Right. So what they do instead is they ignore the platform, largely abandoning it. And then they use things like Google Docs or Notion or other tools to work around its limitations. So from an organizational point of view, that is just bad business. And it's bad business because A, they've invested a lot of money in buying the platform to begin with. B, there's another capital investment in the team rolling it out. Okay. Then there is the countless lost hours of people trying to use the intranet and failing. And in addition, then you've got people starting to put content elsewhere, no joined up system, nobody working, in a kind of any coordinated fashion. And on top of that, probably you've got GDPR issues, you've got, data protection issues as content just gets spread all over these various other platforms. So it's a nightmare from beginning to end, and just a really bad process that undermines productivity, undermines efficiency, and then, of course, often leads to a bad customer experience, because what often happens is, how many times have you called some call center somewhere and they go, "Oh, our system's being really slow today," or the one that drives me particularly nuts, and my wife is so sick of me doing this. When you go into a restaurant and they've got some iPad or to enter the food, and they're standing there tapping away for ages, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going, I only asked for a burger and chips. You could have written it down on a bit of paper and taken it to the kitchen by now. So
yeah.
And those things add up. I worked it out in Pizza Express that we have over here, right? Which is one restaurant. I'm so childish. I timed how long she was spending, because we go in Pizza Express quite a lot, how long she spent at a table, right? Taking an order. And I then worked out, I made guesstimates about how many tables they had in the restaurant, the number of orders they take a day, and I extrapolated out across the number. I then came back and looked up the number of restaurants they have around the country and around the world, and it was costing them millions a year in lost productivity, simply because no designer had ever looked at that app. It obviously either was off the shelf or it was designed by techies. And you see this all the time, and it just drives me nuts.
Yeah. So when I look at something and I can't think of a recent example, but I know that it turns me off and I'm gone. It's kind of like, it's kind of like the old, wait 3 seconds or whatever, or 6 seconds for the website to load. If it doesn't, I'm gone, that kind of deal.
But it's a little bit, the internal logic in these companies is, well, they have to use it. They're employees, right?
Yeah.
That's the big difference. People will spend money on customer facing stuff because they know that people will just give up and leave, right? But they will put their staff through shit, right?
Yeah.
But the result of that is they have to employ more staff because they're not optimizing the systems right. And also, if you take that Pizza Express example, I had to sit there, right?
Yeah.
While this woman is tapping away. And so that creates a bad experience for me as a customer.
Yeah.
Because, she's just standing there hovering and there's this kind of awkward silence while she's doing the order. And call centers are another great example. You get pissed off. The other thing is the lack of joined up systems, where you enter a load of data into a form online, you submit it and it says, call us up, because there's some problem with your order. You call them up and they ask you all the same questions you've just answered in the blooming form. There's no linked up. So even back-end systems have a big impact on the customer experience, even if they're not customer facing directly.
Yeah. So I guess my example is not a good example. Okay. So here's an example that I go back to this one product that I was working on, and you used to go in and have to look at numbers. There was a lot of numbers. And I don't want to say too much. It was a financial SaaS application. So you had to go in and look at the numbers. Numbers matched up. You could submit the thing, and the product would take care of the rest.
Yeah.
So, and I figured out that in the number of clicks, and there was 5 clicks or 5 or 6 clicks to make to do the process like it was supposed to be done. If the UI and the UX were worked out a lot better than it was, it could take 2 to 3.
Yeah.
So I guess you say that, what you just spoke of, and it takes me back to, I wonder how many hours I lost in that product.
Yeah.
Just extra clicks and clicking around and doing that.
Yeah. And nobody considers that,
Mm.
And of course, it's not just the lost productivity hours of the users that are using whatever the system is. It's also oftentimes the lost capital investment in a substandard product that everybody eventually abandons. I mean, intranets are famously where content goes to die. It's like the elephant graveyard of organizational structures. Everybody dumps it on the intranet and then ignores it, because they're badly designed.
Yeah. So, here's one that I'm looking at.
You're making me really nervous, Todd. You're looking at my tweets and laughing. I'm afraid what's going to come out next.
No, it's because these ones that I'm looking at, that I have been looking at, and this one that I'm looking at, it's just it makes me think of this one place where I worked.
Right.
That it was just, if this had been something that were implemented or known or whatever, then it would have been so much easier, because I worked there for 5 years, and it seemed to be the honeymoon was over after a year. And then but if you are repeating the same arguments, write a policy. People accept policies because they aren't personal.
Yes.
Can you go into that one?
Yeah. A little bit of psychology going on there. So this is one that comes that I use quite a lot. Right. Let's say you want to remove a load of content from a website because it's become too overwhelming. There's too much going on. People can't find the things that really matter because of all the rest. If you say to someone, I want to remove your content, they'll flip the hell out, right?
Yeah.
Because even if they've not looked at that content or paid attention to it in ages, you're essentially saying what you produced is no good, right? So it's a criticism of them personally, okay? However, if you say we've got a policy that says if content gets less than this amount of traffic, hasn't been updated in this length of time, and whatever else you want to make up rule wise, then the page is retired. And you say to the same person, are you happy with this policy? Then they'll say yes, right? Because it's abstract. It's not about they probably won't even realize that it means their bit of content's going to go away, to be honest. But even if they do, it's a fair rule that's being applied to everyone, rather than them being being kind of picked out of the crowd and said, your content in particular is shit. Right. It's saying, content that doesn't meet this requirement, whoever produced it, we're gonna get rid of. And I do that all the time because it provides a much more impartial way of assessing stuff, and it's being assessed on a clear set of criteria rather than just my opinion that something should be removed. So yeah, it's a really, really powerful tool. And it
Yeah.
also, the other thing is it focuses people on the right stuff. So it gets them thinking about the criteria that makes a good piece of content in that particular case, right?
Yeah.
So it makes them, for example, start thinking about how can I make this more useful to users so more people view this page, you know? So it kind of nudges them in the right direction at the same time.
Definitely. So I'm going to stop going through your tweets now.
Thank goodness for that.
But I do want to ask is, so at one point, and I think, I think it was, I had mentioned something about this in the Slack channel, in the Slack group that you run. I was thinking of pivoting from where I was at the time to UX.
Yeah.
And then to make it short and sweet, things fell into place for me, and I'm at where I'm at now. How, let me try to word this question correctly. How would you, or what would you say to somebody who is looking to be in the field of UX, or looking to be a UX designer, or in that space, moving from somewhere else, or just starting out?
Oh, that's a really good question. See, to some extent, it depends on what you define as user experience. Sorry to pick at the question, but a lot of people use UI and UX interchangeably. Well, I don't. So I am not a UI designer. I could never produce an interface that is as good as a full-time UI designer. A UX, in my opinion, is any point of interaction that impacts the customer experience through digital channels, right? So I'm as interested in email marketing as I am in the website, right? I'm as interested in pay-per-click as I am the website. So there are all these different facets to it. So if you're going to define user experience in those terms, then I think the secret to it is, well, it's kind of two secrets, really. One is obviously nurturing your empathy is incredibly important. Your understanding of user needs. In fact, I've thought of a third now. Your understanding of users and the challenges you face, and the mental place that they are, the lack of attention that they're giving to what you're doing. The second thing is to have a broad set of interests, be interested in a lot of different topics. So, I pay, interest in everything from latest front end dev techniques through to digital marketing, through to psychology, or, through to conversion rate optimization, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you've got to be very broad as a UX designer and not very deep, if that makes sense. And then the third element is you've really got to nurture your soft skills. So because I can't deliver anything by myself, right? Well, I could, but I never get the opportunity to. So, I've always got to work with a marketing person or a developer or a designer or whoever else. And that empathy that I talked about earlier doesn't just extend to your users, it also extends to your colleagues, the people, what developers need out of the process, what a designer needs out of the process, what a marketer needs out of it. Understanding all these different people, being able to work effectively with them to kind of nudge them in the right direction. And a lot of the stuff that I talk about isn't about, how to use Figma, right? Because there's hundreds of places that you can learn that. Learning Figma takes a couple of hours, right, to get up and running. That's easy, right? It's not even about what CSS, framework to use. Again, CSS, HTML, that's easy. The difficult parts are the human interactions, the soft skills, and that is always what you need to focus on, I'm afraid.
Yeah. So I think we're getting to the point where we're up on time, aren't we?
I've
I
been
don't know.
paying no attention to the time whatsoever. That's the
It's
story of my life. No, we've done about, I reckon, about 45,
45,
35, 40 minutes.
35, 40 minutes. Okay. We still got a little bit of time then. So
Oh, no, because we started early.
we did.
Started early. So, yeah, it's probably more like 45, 50 minutes, he said,
Well,
pulling it out of his ass.
I did an episode yesterday, and it was probably right around the hour mark, and it seemed like it was just 5 minutes long. So
Yeah.
time is nothing now. It really is.
Although I like your presumption that, we must be nearly done with the hour by now. So with me, right? The other one flew by. With me, seems like it's been going on forever. I'm hurt, Todd.
That's not what I was actually. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, Paul. Always a pleasure. So I guess we can go into the last three questions that I usually ask everybody.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
we can go into a little bit of detail here. What about the web these days excites you and keeps you excited in what you do? And, that can pertain to, doesn't have to be the web, I guess.
What keeps me excited? Can I be honest about that?
Yeah.
Rather than giving some pat answer.
Yeah.
The web excites me less now than it ever has. And I think that's for two reasons. One is I think that the industry has matured a lot, right? It's not the Wild West that once it was, where we were making shit up as we went along.
Yeah.
And I'm somebody that thrives off of, new and exciting stuff. And it is moving at a slower pace. I'm not saying it's not innovating. Of course it is, but not quite the pace it was. And I think the second element is because I've been doing this career for so long, that I come across new situations less and less these days, right? Yeah. So you feel like you're rehashing a lot of the same ground, and that's fine, and I think that's a natural evolution of both an industry and a career. So what excites me most now is not talking so much about the technologies or design patterns or systems and stuff like that, but about those kind of human interactions, those relationships in both running a project and how to get the most out of the design project and how to do that kind of stuff. And then also how technology in the web can speak to and connect with people, with users that are using platforms. So I think now it's less about the technology and more about people and how we respond to technology and how we respond to integrating it into our businesses and also as consumers as well. So yeah, it's kind of shifted a little bit, but it's always going to be an interesting area because ultimately it's all about people, and people are always interesting. Well, they are to me anyway.
Yeah. And I should have prefaced these three questions with I've had a wide range of answers, and I've thought all the answers were great, and these are kind of answers I take from the conversation with me afterwards, and I think about them. So here's the second one. If there were one thing that you could change about the web that we know today, what would that be? Now, I've had Mike Montero on, so if that's any indication.
I'm sure he wanted to change quite a lot. So the reason I paused is I'm torn between two things.
Okay.
You remember I mentioned my dissertation at the very beginning.
Yep.
And it makes me seriously sad sometimes to think back to that dissertation and the hope and enthusiasm I had for the web back then.
Yeah.
And the two visions that I had for the web was one, that it would be accessible to all, which it's not.
Right.
And so that would be one area that I would like to change, which obviously resonates with you and your own views on this subject. But
yeah.
and then I think the other one, I had a real hope that it would bring people together, when it actually seems to have done the complete opposite. In my head, I was thinking, well, if you can build relationships with people in Iraq and China and all of these other, because the world was divided by geography back then, those Arab people, they were evil. Those Russians, they were evil. The communists, they were evil. And the web gave us an opportunity to meet these people and know they're just people like us. And that really excited me. And I thought, wow, the web's going to be amazing, because the web is going to destroy all national barriers and all boundaries. And we're all going to come together and we're going to realize that we're all part of the same human race. That didn't work out, did it? No. All we've done is shift the dividing lines. So maybe, yeah, we're friends with people in Australia or New Zealand or America or China or wherever else, but we're now divided along ideological lines, or the algorithm, and how that has shifted things. So that is the other thing that I would change. How you change it, right? The accessibility one is relatively easy. Yes, we can make the web accessible. There's no barriers stopping that, other than, I don't even know what really, other than ignorance, perhaps, is the only barrier there. It's not even a monetary thing. Yeah. So that one's relatively easy to solve. The other one is massively complicated, and I wouldn't have a clue, because perhaps at the end of the day, you're fighting fundamental human nature and our tribalism, that effectively we're still very tribal. And whether we make those tribes around geography or viewpoints or whatever else, it's there. So perhaps that isn't the internet's problem. That's humanity's problem, which is a whole nother podcast.
Yes. And one I won't be hosting.
Yeah, exactly. Keep it well out of that
one. Because that's what, thinking back to when I first, went online and, put that America Online CD I always got in the mail in the CD player of my IBM computer. Yeah. And, was talking to people. I found that fascinating. And now it's just like, you look at Twitter some days and go, nope. And you turn it right off, or I do anyway. There is, it's just,
there was a real hope and connection in those early days. One of the first ever virtual communities, right? The first ever one of the first places beyond just document repository was a community called The Well, that I was lucky enough to be a part of, at least on the edges of. And there was, I cannot remember one argument on there, right? It was everyone. Now, of course, at that time, it was only a very small slither of society that was actually on the internet. Yeah. And I think that's a part of it as well. We were our own little bubble back then, because only a certain group of people were ever online. Yeah. So I think as the web has become more inclusive, has drawn more of society in, that's where the conflicts come from. So you can't really solve that, because what you're effectively doing is taking a massively diverse group of people with lots of different viewpoints and backgrounds and putting them all in a room together and then being surprised when they argue. Yeah. Well, it's, and it's very easy just to go, oh, and it's all social media's fault and it's all Facebook's fault and Twitter's fault. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely think it is their fault to a large degree, but I do think there are some underlying problems there that can't be magically solved by changing the algorithm and banning inaccurate information, you know?
Yeah, definitely. So my last question is your favorite part of front end development or design that you like to nerd out over, and that could go, into, you can even say your newsletter, and anything really.
The thing that I nerd out most about is probably psychology and behavioral science. Because people are weird. We are weird, right? You really, when you dig into it, you see what a mismatch of like, on one hand, we're very logical and very, cognitive and intelligent and all the rest of it. And then in the other hand, we're basically animals. We're, or even worse than that, just biological machines that just do random shit. It's just fascinating. And particularly around areas like cognitive load. I love the subject of cognitive load. And if anybody listening to this has not come across the invisible gorilla experiment, or invisible monkey, type into YouTube invisible monkey, invisible gorilla, and watch it, and you'll immediately realize how blooming useless we are as humans, how we have such low capability to process information. But on the other hand, we're remarkable in what we can do and process, but it can fall down very quickly when you start asking people to do too much on a website. It doesn't take a lot for us to become gibbering heaps and unable to do the most basic of things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So when I go onto a site, for instance, and it's just too much, I turn into one of those heaps.
Yeah. What's really interesting to me is that what is too much will vary from day to day, right? Yes. Because our cognitive, think of it as a bucket of crap we can deal with, right? Yeah. Some days we sit down in front of our computer and the bucket's empty. There's nothing in it. And so we can deal with quite bad or quite a complex website. Other times we've had a bad night's sleep, had a rubbish commute to work, had an argument with someone. And so our bucket is almost full before we even sit down. And that's not taking into account one of the best usability test sessions I ever did was I went and instead of normally when we do usability testing, we bring people to us, don't we, and sit them down in an office, or we do it remotely. But this one particular time, I went to the participants and I went into their houses. And so I went to this one woman's house, and she was a total cat person. She had like 9 cats or something ridiculous. And every surface was covered with cat memorabilia. And so we sat down to the usability testing, and there were numerous things that ensured she would not succeed at any usability test that I ran. First of all, she had so many knickknacks and clutter and little porcelain cats and stuff on her desk that she had probably, I don't know, a tiny space to move a mouse in. So she was like kind of having to move a mouse, like pick it up, move it, pick it up, move it. So she couldn't even navigate the website properly. Then she had Post-it notes stuck on around the screen of the monitor that actually covered up some of the usability element, some of the user interface elements. So it's like, well, you're not going to see those, are you? But the real killer, the thing that really stopped her from succeeding in the task, is the minute she sat down, a cat jumped on her lap. And she spent the whole of the usability test juggling the cat. So half of her cognitive load, half her bucket was full with dealing with this cat. Now replace that cat with a toddler, or you're on a train, or you're out in a public place or anything else. Yeah. We think that everybody uses our website is giving it our full attention, and we're just not. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I always think it's that we have, what is it, the less of a span of attention than a goldfish was.
Yeah,
I can't even remember where I read that.
There was a study done. I think it was Microsoft that did the study. I can't remember. That basically we will spend about 8 seconds assessing a website and deciding whether to stay on it or not. right? It was a Time magazine article written on it. I can't remember exactly where it is now, but and so if the website doesn't grab our attention in 8 seconds, then we wander off, we lose interest, right? And actually, and there was other research done, I think it was by a group in Canada, again, don't quote me on this, it was on the BBC website, that actually we will make an assessment about a website. So we will decide our initial reaction in 50 milliseconds. It takes longer to blink than it does for us to go, oh no, this is a shit site.
Yeah. Wow.
Which is terrifying, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Well, I think we're down on time. So I don't know that time thing again. But anyways, I don't have any more questions for you.
That's good.
And I've
no more
down.
tweets.
No more tweets.
Oh, thank goodness.
So I'd like to close out the podcast with my guests letting the listeners know what they currently have going on and where that English thing, where people can find you online. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, so I do podcasts, I do courses, I do books, I do blogging, I do newsletters, all of that you can find at boagworld.com, BOAG world.com. However, I've taken a bit of a liberty. And if you go to newsletter.boagworld.com/Todd, you will actually, you can sign up for my newsletter there, which is what, as you've already gathered, the thing I'm most passionate about. And you'll get a free copy of my book, User Experience Revolution, awesome. Which I think, when I was talking about, persuading people, working with stakeholders, getting people to care about user experience, that's what's covered in that particular book. So it might be worth checking that out. So it's boagworld.com/boagworld. What did I say? No, I messed that up completely, didn't I? Newsletter.boagworld.com/Todd. Yes. You can always unsubscribe if you don't like the newsletter and just keep the book.
No, the newsletter is great. I recommend it to people all the time. So yeah. Whether they listen to me, that's another story. So
well, we all feel that pain.
Yeah. Paul, thank you very much for spending your afternoon. It's afternoon there. Thank you for spending your afternoon with me, taking the time out of your day to sit down and chat. I really appreciate it, and it was great to talk to you.
Anytime. You're more than welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me, Todd, and best of luck with the show.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to the Front End Nerdery podcast. I'll be back next time with a new guest, new conversation about front-end design development and other topics. So if you would please rate this podcast on your podcast device of choice, like, subscribe, and watch on the Front End Nerdery YouTube channel. Links to transcripts and show notes there, because I try to make this podcast as accessible as I can to everybody. And I'm Todd Libby, and this has been the Front End Nerdery podcast. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.